Hello everyone. In today's video, we're going to be building a password generator using JavaScript, and this is a great project because it's not very difficult to do, but there's a ton of different ways you can build this project, and I'm going to be showing you the way that is by far one of the cleanest ways to design the code, so you can pick up best practice tips in JavaScript. So let's get started now. Welcome back to Web Dev Simplified. My name's Kyle, and my job is to simplify the web for you. So if that sounds interesting, make sure you subscribe for more videos just like this one. To get started, I have an example of what we're going to be building over here on the right. And as you can see, it's just a typical password generator. We can determine how many characters we want by using the scroll bar, or we can actually just input it here. We can include uppercase, numbers, symbols, and then when we click generate password, as you can see, it's going to generate a password. So obviously, to get started, we're going to need an index.html page to put all of our code. And if we just put exclamation point and hit enter, it's going to give us the boilerplate code. We can just give it a simple title of password generator. And then also, we're going to need to have two other files. We're going to have a JavaScript file, so that's going to be inside of a script tag, and we're just going to call this script.js. And make sure you defer this so that it loads after the body of your HTML. And then we're also going to need a link tag, and this is going to be for our CSS. We're going to just call it styles.css, and let's just create those files now. So we have script.js, and we're going to have styles.css, just like that. And now that we have that done, the first thing we can work on is our HTML. And to get started, the very first thing I want to create is a container, which is going to contain this blue box with the black border. So we can just create a container div here, and inside of here is going to be all of our code. First, we're going to have this password generator title, which is just going to be an h1 tag. And inside of it, we're just going to put password generator, generator, just like that. And then also underneath of that, we're going to have this section that actually contains our generated password. And we're just going to put that inside of an h3. And for now, we'll just default it to password. So that way, when you load up the page, it's just going to say password. And we can actually open this up with Live Server just to see what we have so far. As you can see, we have our title as well as our generated password placeholder for now. The next thing we're going to have is the actual form, which is going to contain all of our different input elements. And if you remember, we have the number of characters here. So let's create a label for that. And this label is going to be inside of here. It's going to say number of characters. And then for that individual label, we're going to have an input. And this input is going to be a range input. That's what gives us this slider over here that you can see. And then we just want to also, on top of having that range input, we want to have a number input, which allows us to have our number over here that we can control our range with. We're going to need JavaScript to hook that up. But for now, if we save this and go over here, you can see we have our number input as well as this slider over here. And one thing that we do need to do is actually set up some minimum values. So we want a minimum of 1, and we want to have a maximum here of 50. And we want that both on our range and on our number input here. Also, we need to give these IDs so we can select them in the JavaScript. So let's just come in here. We can say ID, character, amount, range. We're going to do the exact same thing for our number input, but we're just going to call this character amount number. And then we can use the ID inside of our for here. And by doing that, now if we save this and come over here, when we click on our label, number of characters, it's going to put our focus inside the input over here. Also, let's just put some default values in here. We're going to say by default, these are both going to be 10. So we can just say value 10 and value 10. And now as you can see, both these inputs are set to 10 by default. The next thing that we need to work on is adding in all of these different checkboxes, which is going to be fairly simple. We're again going to have a label with a for attribute. And inside of this label, we're going to first put here, include uppercase, and then we're going to have an input for that. And this input is going to be a type of checkbox. And of course, we want to make sure we give this an ID. We're going to call this include uppercase, and we're going to use the same for. This is going to work exactly the same. Now, if we click on our include uppercase, it'll check our box for us. Let's just copy this for the other ones. So we can come in here and we can say that we want to include numbers. And we want to change this to include numbers. And lastly, same exact thing, but this is going to be for symbols. So include symbols, and include symbols, Now if we look over here, we have pretty much all of the form inputs that we need. The last thing we need to do is this generate password button. So we can just create a button down here. We're going to make sure that we give it a type of submit, and we want to just say generate password. Whoops. Password, just like that. And now as you can see over here, we have all of our different form inputs correctly on the page. Now with all of that HTML out of the way, we can start working on the styles. And the very first style I want to work on is the body. So we can just select our body tag here. And of course, the very first thing that we see is our background color is just going to be this really dark black color. And if we save that, you see we now have that background color. And of course, to make our text stand out, we want to make sure our text is going to be white. And there we go. Now we can read everything much better. The next thing we want to do is center all of our content. And the easiest way to do that is by using flexbox. So we'll say display flex, justify content in the center, and we want to align our items in the center. And if you're unfamiliar with flexbox, I have an entire video covering it, which you can find linked in the cards in the description below. Also, to make sure we center vertically, we need to make sure we set a min height of 100 view height, and that's going to fill the entire height of our screen. And to get rid of this annoying scroll bar, all we need to do is set our margin to 0, and that's going to get rid of the scroll bar for us. Now lastly, so that we have a font that is a little bit interesting to look at, we can just come into our font family here, and we can just choose one of these values. For example, we can just go with the Georgia font, and if we save, you can see our font just looks a little bit more interesting. It's nothing amazing, but it'll work for this application. Next, we need to actually select this wrapper div that we created, which we gave a class of container. So inside of here, we can just say .container, and if you remember right, this is going to be this giant blue box area. So we want to change the background color to be that blue color, which is 6699. And if we save that, you can see we get that blue color. Also, we can change instead of here our padding to be 3 rem, that we have a bunch of space around our content, as well as we want a little bit of a border radius so we can get those rounded corners. In our case, 1 rem is going to work fine. And then that black border is just going to help it stand out a little bit from around the edges. So we'll say 2 pixels of solid black. And as you can see, we have that nice looking border right now. Also, we can make it so that all of our content inside of here is in the center by doing the same exact flexbox trick. So we can say display flex, justify content in the center, and align items in the center. And as you can see, now everything is lined up in the center, but to make it vertical instead of horizontal, all we need to do is change the flex direction to column. And as you can see, everything went back to going in that vertical direction. The next thing we need to work on is styling our form inputs because they're obviously a mess right now. And the easiest way to do that is just to put a class on our form. We'll just give it a class of form, and we're actually going to use CSS Grid for this. So if you're unfamiliar with CSS Grid, I again have an entire video on it in the cards and the description, so make sure you check that out. But essentially, we want to change here the display to grid, and then we want to modify the grid template columns, and we want there to be 2 separate columns, one for the label, as you can see here, and one for the value section. And we want them both just to be auto-sized. So we're just going to say grid template columns, auto and auto. And as you can see, we now have 2 columns. But there's a problem, and that is because our range slider and our input are on 2 separate rows. We want them to take up 1 column instead of 2 different columns. So to do that, we're just going to wrap them in a div. So that way that div is going to span an entire column, and these objects inside of it are going to be in that column. Now if we save, you can see that our slider and our input are both on the same column. But everything is really scrunched up right next to each other. So in order to fix that, we want to add a little bit of a gap. First, we're going to add a gap on the row. We're just going to use 1 rem, and then we're going to use a column gap in between our columns of 3 rem. And as you can see, that really spaces out our elements and looks a lot better. The last thing we need to do is just make sure that our grid is centered. So we'll say justify content centered and align items in the center. Now that'll make sure that our grid is always inside the center of its container instead of stretching or being pushed around. Now what we need to do is actually style our different elements. So for example, this password generator title. So let's just add a class to that of title. Whoops, title, just like that. And now inside of our style sheet, we can select that title and we can first remove the margin from it. And we can also make sure we text align it in the center, just so everything is in the center. And there we go. You can see that just made that our password generator title is a little bit more squished up with our display password. Also, we should bold these labels so they're easier to read. So we can just say label, and we want to make all of those a font weight of bold. And as you can see, that just made them a little bit easier to read. Let's expand our screen a little bit. There we go. Another thing that you may notice is that our input box here is not centered with our range slider, and it's also very wide. Considering the maximum number is 50, it'll only ever be 2 digits long. So in order to fix that, we can just put a class on this wrapper container. We're going to call it character amount container. We can just copy this selector, and inside of our style sheet, we can use that selector, and all that we need to do is actually make sure that we set it to a display of flex, and then we want to align our items in the center. And you'll see that's going to align these in the center vertically, just like that. And then we can select our input inside of here, our number input. So let's just add a class to that, which is just going to be number input. And inside of our style sheet, we can just say, whoops, number input. And all we want to do is set the width to be 2 rem, which is going to be about the width of 2 characters, as you can see here. And that looks a lot better now. Now there are only 2 elements left on our page to style, and one of those is going to be our password input section. So again, let's just add a class to that. We can come in here, we can say that our class is password display, and let's copy over that class. And what we need to do inside this password display is first change the background color to white, because as you can see it's white, so we'll say background color of white. Make sure we indent that properly. Whoops. There we go. And we also want the color of this to be black, so that way the text will show. And as you can see over here, now we have a white background and the black text. Also, we need to add a little bit of padding because right now that's way too squished up. So we'll say 1 rem of padding. We're going to add a border around this of 1 pixel, and we're going to use the same color as our background. There we go. That looks pretty nice. And we also want to make sure we manually set the height and width of this, so that way if we change the size of our password, it's not going to make our box grow and shrink. So what we want to do is we want to make sure we have a height here of 2 rem. Essentially that'll allow us to fit 2 rows of text. And we also want to set in here a width, which is just going to be 350 pixels. And as you can see, that box is going to take up essentially the full width of our container, which looks really nice. Next, we're going to use that same exact display flex trick that we used all across this application to center everything. So we'll just align everything in the center. And that's going to make it so that our text always shows up in the center, just like this. And we also want to make sure we set the word break to break all. And this means that if our password extends past the end of the line, it'll just break in the middle of the line like this and go on to the next row. Also, let's set a really small border radius, just so we have that nice looking rounded corner. We'll say 0.5 rem. And if we go back to our app, you can see this is already coming together. Now the last thing is this generate password button. So we can just put a class on our button. We'll just give it a btn class. And now inside of our style sheet, we can select that btn class. And inside of here, what we want is this to span 2 columns because we want it to take up the entire width on the bottom, as you can see over here. So we can just say that we want our grid column to span 2. And that's just going to make it span 2 columns like that, as you can see. Also, we want to get rid of our background color. So we can come in here, say our background color is going to be transparent. That just makes it so we can see through our button like this. Also, we're going to set a border on this, and our border is going to be 2 pixels of solid white, which is going to give it that outline, which is looking really nice. We also want to make our text color to be white, and we're going to need to put a bunch of padding on this, so we'll say 0.5 rem and 1 rem. That spaces it out and looks pretty good. A little bit hard to read though, so we'll up the font weight to be bold, and there we go, that's a little bit easier to read. Change the cursor to be pointer. That just makes it so when we hover, you get that little pointer icon instead of the normal icon. And then the last thing that we need to do is just, of course, add in our border radius. We'll just do 1 rem, which is going to round our corners all the way around. Now the last thing is we want to add a hover state to this. And inside our hover state, all we're going to do is change the background color. And we want to make our background just a slightly transparent white color. That way we can get our blue to shine through. So we'll just say 6Fs, which is going to be white. And then 3.3 is going to give us a mostly transparent white. And as you can see when we hover that, it's a mostly transparent white, which shows up as this nice light blue color. And that's all of the CSS for our form. And now we can move on to the fun part, which is going to be the JavaScript. So the first thing that we need to do is make it so that our slider links up with our number input over here. And to do that, we can just use our ID selectors from our HTML. So we have our character amount range. So we can say const character amount range is equal to our document.getElementById. We just pass it in that character amount range. we can do the exact same thing, but for our character amount number. So we can just put character amount number and character amount number, just like that. And now we can set up event listeners on those. So our character amount number, add event listener, and we want to say on input, which is any time that our input changes inside of our box, we want to call a function, and we're just going to call this sync character amount. And we want to do the exact same thing on our range input. So anytime we change our range input, we also want to make sure that we call the exact same function. And now we can create that function. And this function, of course, is going to take our event argument, and we can get our value, which is just going to be here, e.target.value. And then we can set our character amount number.value equal to that value. And we can do the same thing with our range, just like that. And now when we change our slider, you see it'll change our input. And when we change our input, you see it'll also change our slider. They're linked to each other, which is really nice. The next thing that we need to do is set up our form so that when we click generate password, it'll actually generate a password instead of just refreshing our page. So the easiest way to do that is if we put on an ID on our form, we'll just say here, ID, it's going to be equal to password generator form, just like that. And now inside of our JavaScript, we can say that our form is going to be equal to document.getElementById of password generator form. And then we can set up a simple event listener. We want to listen for the submit event. So anytime we try to submit our form, we're going to call this function, and it's going to take an event. And all we want to do is say e.preventDefault. This is going to stop our form from submitting and refreshing our page. So now if we change this, click generate password, you see that nothing's actually happening because we're preventing the default, but not actually doing anything. The next thing we want to do in here is we want to get a password variable, and we want to get it from some function, which we're just going to call generate password. And this generate password function is going to take the number of characters. So we can say character amount. It's going to take if we want to include uppercase. It's also going to take if we include numbers. And lastly, it'll take if we include symbols. So to get these variables, we just need to pull them from the values inside of our page here. So we get our character amount from our character amount number. So we can say character amount is equal to character amount number dot value. But we need to get selectors for all of our other elements. So as you see, we have our include uppercase ID for our input here. So we can just say const include uppercase element equals document.getElementById, and we'll just pass it in that ID. And then inside of here, we can say that our include uppercase is going to be equal to include uppercase element dot checked. And this just tells us true or false if the button is checked. And we can do this 2 more times. We want to do this for include numbers, and we also want to do this for include symbols. And we're going to name the variables exactly the same. So this will be include numbers element, and this is going to be include symbols element. And we can just copy this uppercase. So this will be include numbers. Make sure that's spelled correctly. Whoops. So include numbers, and this one will be include symbols. Just like that. And of course we need to change it over here to include numbers and include symbols. Now when we call this function, which we haven't created yet, we're going to be passing in all the values from our form here that we have based on our checkboxes and based on our input from our characters. So let's just create that function, generate password, and as we know, it's going to take a character amount, it's going to take include uppercase, include numbers, and include symbols. And inside of this function, we're going to do all of our code for generating our password. And this right here is really where you can go a ton of different ways with the code, but I'm going to show you the cleanest way to write this code, and that is using character codes. So if we pull up this sheet over here, this is going to be all of the character codes for all of the ASCII characters. And as you can see, we have our uppercase numbers, our lowercase numbers, we have our numbers here, as well as all of these different special symbols that we can use. And what we can do is we can actually change from this number 65 to this string character by just using string.fromCharCode. And if we pass in 65 here, it's actually going to give us an uppercase A. If we pass in 82, it's going to give us an uppercase R, and so on. So if we create a list of all the character codes that we can use, then we can just write a simple for loop and loop over it a bunch of times to create all of the characters of our password. And that is so much easier than writing out an array that says A, and then it's going to have B inside of it and so on like this. That takes a lot of work and it's not very clean. So in this way, we're going to have a much cleaner code setup by just using these numbers instead of using an array of strings. And we can actually use a function to generate our arrays for us. So we can just say array here from high to low. And we're going to pass it in the low value and the high value. And let's actually just name this from low to high. Makes a little bit more sense. There we go. And inside of here, all we need to do is create a simple for loop that's going to go from a variable I that is equal to low. It's going to add 1 each time until it gets to the point that it is the high number, just like this. So essentially we're looping through all of the different variables between our low number and our high number. And we're going to put this inside of this empty array right here. So we can just say array.push, and we want to push in I, and then of course return our array. So now this function generates us an array from our low number to our high number. So up here, we can create a variable. We're just going to call this uppercase char codes. And this is going to be equal to array from low to high. And as you can see, 65 is our lowest uppercase number. And our highest uppercase number is 90 down here. So let's put in 90. And now we have all of our uppercase character codes inside of this list from 65 to 90. Let's do the same thing with lowercase, because by default, we're going to use lowercase passwords. And that's 97 to 122. So we say 97, 122, just like that. And now we already have a lot of the code set up. Let's do our numbers as well. This is 48 to 57. So let's copy this, say number character codes, and that is going to be, as I mentioned, 48 to 57. Now lastly, we have our symbol character codes, symbol. And this is going to be slightly differently because there's actually quite a few gaps. First, we have 33 to 47, which is a bunch of different symbols. So we can come in here, 33 to 47, but we want to make sure we concatenate a new array onto that because we also want to get all these values from 58 to 64. So we can say the exact same thing, all of these arrays, but what is it from? 58 to 64. We also want to get these values from 91 to 96. So we can do another concatenation. And we want to get the arrays here from 91 to 96. And then lastly, we want to get these 123 to 126. So again, we're just going to concatenate that on. This is going to be an array from low to high of 123 to 126. Now we have all of our different arrays of character codes. And to show you what's actually working, inside of here, I'm just going to console.log out, for example, our lowercase character codes. And now, if I inspect this, and I click on the generate password button, you can see we get all of our character codes, 65 to 90, which is all of our lowercase character codes. And this is the same for all of our different arrays here that we created for lowercase, uppercase, numbers, and symbols. And now in this function, we can create an overall list of all of our character codes and then loop through and just randomly choose one each time. So the first thing we want to do is set up our variable, which is going to be here, our character codes. So we can say charcodes, and we want to default this to our lowercase character codes. And then we want to append on our include uppercase. So if we, for example, are including our uppercase, then now charcodes is going to be equal to charcodes.concat our uppercase character codes, just like that. And we can do the exact same thing for our numbers. So let's say include numbers, and we want to concatenate on, our number character codes, just like that. And lastly, we want to do include symbols, and this is going to be our symbol character codes. Now our character codes is going to be a list of all of the possible character codes that we can generate. And all we need to do is just loop for all of our different character amounts. So we can just come in here. We can say let I equals 0 when I is less than our character amount. Character amount. And we just want to add 1 each time. This is going to loop once for each character. And we're going to need a variable which is going to store all of our passwords. So we'll say password characters. That's just going to be an empty array. And then inside of our loop, we can just say password characters dot push, and we want to push our character. But in order to get that character, we just need to get a random value from our list of character codes, as you can see here. So we can say our character is going to be equal to character codes, and we want to get a single index. And what we want to do is say math.floor of math.random. And what we want to do is we want to get a random number, and then we want to multiply that random number times our character amount. And now this code looks a little bit confusing, but essentially what it's doing is it's getting a random number between 0 and our character amount, and then it's making sure that it's an integer by doing math.floor, and then it's going to give us our character code. So this is actually going to be our character code here. And what we want to do is actually change our character code by doing string dot from charcode, and we're going to pass in our character code, just like that. And now we can return our password characters. We want to, of course, turn that into a string, so we're going to join on an empty string. It essentially is going to return our array into a string, and inside of here, all we need to do is just set our password text here. So let's come back into here and give our password display an ID of password display. That way we can select it in our JavaScript, and we can come in here. This is going to be our password display, and we want to set it to our password display ID. And then we can say password display dot inner text is just going to be equal to our password. And now if we click generate password, you can see we get 10 characters here, but obviously these are uppercase instead of lowercase. So it looks like I have our character codes swapped. So these are going to be our lowercase. These are going to be our uppercase. And now let's check that. You can see we get lowercase. If we include the uppercase characters, you can see we're going to get a combination of uppercase and lowercase, but of course that's also not working. So it looks like somewhere in our code down here we have a problem. And if we take a look here, it looks like the issue is that I'm actually using character amount. So this is only giving us a number between 1 and the number of characters we specify, but we actually want to get a number between 1 and our charcodes.length. This is essentially going to give us any character inside this character codes array. Now if we include uppercase, click generate, you can see we're getting uppercase and lowercase. If we do numbers, we'll scale this up. You can see we're getting some numbers inside of here. We got a 7 there, for example. If we do it again, we get even more numbers. And lastly, if we include symbols, we're getting a bunch of symbols, uppercase, lowercase, and numbers, which is an incredibly secure password. And that's all there is to this really simple password generator. If you enjoyed this video, check out my other videos linked over here, and subscribe to the channel for more videos just like this one. Thank you very much for watching, and have a good day.